So, question: do video games make young men work less? Oh, I can hear the moms and dads saying, "Of course they do." No, I'm not talking about that. But the question really is: do video games make young men work less? Because the National Bureau of Economic Research in the U.S. says that males aged 31 to 55 are working about 163 fewer hours annually than they were in 2000. So that's like 4 weeks a year. Age 21 to 30, that number rises to 200 hours. That's 5 weeks per year. So my first conclusion would have been that women have consistently been stepping forward and that work is just more divided and men are spending more time at home. Maybe they're doing more parenting. This makes sense to me, right? The working paper, however, blames this, or at least suggests that it's a result of compelling video games. So the question, are you buying it? Are you buying it? We have an expert with us. Cam Adair is founder of Game Quitters, and Cam Adair is a former addict, a former game addict. Is that right, Cam?
That's correct, yeah.
Oh, okay, so explain addiction in the context that I'm using it to describe video games, because there are addictions that everybody's familiar with. We're talking about alcohol. We're talking about, I don't know, cocaine, drugs. How do you become addicted to video games?
Well, addiction to video games always focuses on whether or not there's negative impact and a desire to continue to play despite negative use. And so, I run a community of 25,000 members in 81 countries around the world who are all coming together saying, hey, I struggle to quit playing games. And we absolutely see an impact on, grades and employment and marriages and just overall quality of life. And so it comes from a habit that you're unable to stop.
So you're buying the study is what you're saying.
I see the studies every single day in our community. And I personally experienced it where instead of going to work, I was gaming. And in fact, I was even pretending to have jobs and deceiving my family. But we see a ton of this in our community where, one of the insights is that games are a very safe place to experience risk and failure, right? If you die in a game, it's not a big deal. But if you apply for a job and you get rejected, that actually hurts and that demotivates you from being able to try again. And so we see a lot of that reported in the community.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat the statistics and I'm going to open the lines because I'd like to hear from people who are either game addicts themselves because they consider them to be so, or people who say they play games and there's no addiction involved, they can walk away. I'd like to hear from people who are either married to or parents of men aged 21 to 30 who supposedly work about 200 hours less a year as a result of video games. Those kinds of people who believe that you are or either involved or affected by this. 416-870-6400, star 640 on your cell phone if you'd like to call us. But I'm going to keep you on the line, Cam, because I find this fascinating in the sense that when we call it an addiction, we're putting a very serious label on it. An addict, and let's use alcohol as the long tried and true test. An alcoholic is always an alcoholic, and an alcoholic who is on the wagon is a person who never, ever touches the stuff because he or she will fall back in. Would you take that and apply it when you use the term addict to describe game quitters who are reformed?
Absolutely. And it's so important. I want to get this across to everyone listening. It's not that everyone who plays video games is an addict. In fact, it's a very low percentage, under 10%. But 10% of 1.5 billion people who play games worldwide is still a very large number.
150 million people.
I personally have not gamed in about 5 years, and there's no sense in me risking continuing to game and being vulnerable to that. And so there's lots of people out there who play and they're fine. And there's some people who play and it's causing negative impact. Lifestyle changes would help. And there's some people who play and they continuously will relapse. And it will be very similar to a classical addiction. And we've seen that in our own research. And I experience it every single day with our community.
Is the demographic that they're describing the one that is affected most in your experience?
So let me give you some interesting stats on our community. Our largest demographic is college students. So think 23 years old, male college student. Lots of them are now failing out of college and becoming that kind of demographic of unemployed young males. Another interesting stat is that 48% of our audience on YouTube is between 25 and 34. YouTube would be more of a younger person's platform, yet 25 to 34-year-olds make up half of our audience on that YouTube. And because of that, those are a lot of people who should be working adults or are working adults and yet are still coming home and struggling, especially with their family relationships.
Okay, so the study didn't try to draw these conclusions. It just asked, why don't young men want to work? And the study organizers tell us that since 2004, particularly that year, video games have reduced work by young males by 15 to 30 hours over a year. And they say that 0809, because there was a recession and more people were out of work, gave people extra time, and they became somewhat or largely addicted. Do you have any statistics that mesh with that?
What we see every single day, and where I see, a stat that I think is really important for people to understand, is there was a study done in CAMH, by CAMH out of Ontario, that found 13% of students between grades 7 and 12 have a video game problem. Now, the reason that's important is because, again, our largest demographic is college students, so this becomes a problem in high school. Then they're able to get away with it. They get to college. Now they're more independent. They're more on their own, less supervision, harder classwork, more stress. The way they deal with stress is they game. That gets them further and further behind to the point where maybe they fail out of class, maybe they fail out of college altogether. Now they're at home, living in their parents' basement, and they're supposed to be getting a job, but instead of getting a job, they're working. So I think the study touches on aspects that we see, but in our community, we're seeing the full spectrum of this experience.